Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'm going to give us a minute to get oriented and have some of the viewers join in before I get started. Okay, welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this evening. Appreciate you all being here. My name is Nishant Shah. I'm the Environmental Justice Specialist here at the National Wildlife Federation. And I'll pass it over to Laura to introduce herself, my co-host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alora Carter. I am the Senior Program Manager for Special Projects, a part of the Environmental Justice and Community Health and Revitalization team at the National Wildlife Federation. And thank you for spending your evening with us, depending on where you are in the U.S.
I'll get started by giving you a little bit of background on these roundtables. So today's roundtable is hosted by the Clean Economy Coalition of Color, otherwise known as CECC. It's an alliance of some of the nation's most visionary leaders and advocates, specifically from the global majority folks. And we're committed to building a just and inclusive clean economy by centering voices of communities who are most impacted by environmental justice. So as September is Disaster Preparedness Month, and we also just passed the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, we found it timely to hear directly from community leaders and experts who are on the front lines of disaster response and resilience. So today we're going to explore how their communities have navigated the growing threat of climate disasters, and then sharing some of the lessons and preparations and responses that lead to long-term recovery and resilience. So this is going to be a collaborative conversation. We're encouraging everyone to ask questions, share your experiences, and join us in imagining bold solutions. So yeah, some of the goals for this webinar is we're going to start by uplifting community voices and stories, share science-based tactics and adjustments to policy changes, and then orient all of us to the resources that we are going to use for resilience and preparedness. I'll pass it back to Alora just to orient us to the Zoom webinar and kind of talk about the poll that we have going on.
Sure thing. So as you are all in the Zoom space with us, there will be a poll that is going to be up for you to vote throughout the entire webinar experience. It's just going to ask you some questions about what type of topics or issues you want us, the Clean Economy Coalition of Color, to focus on in future roundtable discussions. So please feel free to give us your thoughts, your answers. We welcome them, and we will do with them accordingly and try to include them in some of our next discussions we have in the upcoming future. Also, I wanted to tell you all about the Q&A section. So on this webinar, we don't have exactly a Q&A, but we do have the chat function below. You are able to leave your questions throughout the discussion in the chat function, and we're going to make time to answer some of these questions towards the end of our discussion. Also, there is the resources tab. So the resources tab is actually pretty cool. It's at the bottom of your screen along with the other different little icons at the bottom. But the resource tab is awesome because it's going to give you access to some of the interesting links that our panelists have given us that talks about their work and the things they're working on. It'll also give you links to documents from our panelists, as well as bios for each person that you're going to hear speaking today. So take time to click upon those and see some of the great resources that they put together to share with you all that we love to spend all day talking about this evening, but we won't exactly have as much time as we'd like to do that.
Great, thank you, Laura. The poll has just been launched. It should be up on your screen. And yeah, we have a great set of panelists here with us today who are going to be talking about their community stories, community science, and the policy side of disaster preparedness. So I'm just going to introduce some of them and then hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves too. So first we have Pooja Ravindran, who's with Chicago Asian Americans for Environmental Justice and is also the Chief of Staff on the Chicago's 40th Ward. Then we have Norma Shires Hartel, who's with the Hispanic Access Foundation. And then next up, we have Andrew Kleiner, who's with the Environmental Collaboratory. And we have Omar Mohammed, who is with the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities. We have Hana Abdelati, who's with the Atlantic Councils for Climate Resilience Center. And then we have Courtney Foley, who's with the Climate Action Campaign. And then from NWF, we have our science experts, Karina Newsom and Diane Pataki joining in. I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves further. Take about 1 to 2 minutes to kind of say your name, affiliation, some of the current work you're in, and then we just have a simple question of what is one word to describe the current state of disaster preparedness for you all. I'm going to send that in the chat too, but Booj, if you want to kick that off, thank you.
Absolutely. I'm running on like 4 hours of sleep, everybody. Everyone who's being affected by DHS, can I get a boo? I'm Pooja. I use they, them pronouns. I'm based in Chicago. I am with Chicago Asian Americans for Environmental Justice, as well as I serve on city government. And I think one of the things that we have been doing sort of at this nexus of working for government and working with community is to understand the state of disaster preparedness at the city of Chicago level, as well as the county and state level. And I just think one of the things that we're reflecting on is that it's hard to find and piece together information across various jurisdictions. So I'll end with that and pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, I can pass it over to Andrew. Also, before Andrew goes, I want to clarify to the panelists that there is no chat available. It's just a Q&A. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, take it away, Andrew.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here. My name is Andrew Kleiner. I'm the Director of Community Science at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philly, in Center City. Very nice to meet everyone. I'm an ecologist by trade, and when I took the job in Philly, I learned that what we were going to do was we were going to do community-based participatory research, which means that we get out in the communities and we work directly with community members who have environmental issues or questions about climate resilience and environmental justice issues. And we work with them directly to take our academic knowledge and meet their local knowledge and come to actionable conclusions and make sure that they have implementable steps and not like binders on a wall, but we can make a real difference in the community. We want to raise capacity. We want to empower people. We want to democratize science. And we do that on the streets of Philadelphia on a regular basis. We also do it in Camden, in Delaware. And I also work with a network of municipalities across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to work directly with municipal leaders on opportunities to identify climate action plan steps that they can take to make their community stronger at a municipal level. So it's a multifaceted approach to community science, and that also all rests with my research in urban ecology and biodiversity and how we can connect communities directly to biodiversity and to the nature around them to like, you don't have to have the privilege to get out to a national park. You can appreciate it right in your backyard in South Philly, sorry. So that's something I'm very proud of, and it's something we work on very hard. I don't remember the other things I was supposed to do. Let me check the box. one word to describe the current state of disaster preparedness. You know, people are working together, so I think the one word would be, despite everything, hopeful. So, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll pass it over to Norma now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Norma Chaides. I'm mainly an artist and a cultural worker, where I mainly worked as a museum curator and a historic preservationist. In my current role, I'm a community navigator through the Community Navigator program with Hispanic Access Foundation. And what that is an initiative of the Forest Service that focused on one mission to connect community-based organizations with Forest Service funding opportunities and help build grant writing and compliance capacity. We help local leaders build climate resiliency. My role is the community navigator, so I do a lot of outreach and connect with communities and community leaders. And we serve the whole U.S., including Puerto Rico, so there's several of us. But there's also grant navigators who are grant experts and help a lot of the communities and leaders that we've been working with, as well as our admin navigators who kind of help with the ins and outs of the program. I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Norma. Did you want to choose one word to describe the current state?
I think from what I've been experiencing is that it's very fast. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of adaptability that we have to do, but right now I think it's just very fast moving.
Thanks. And I'll pass it over to you, Courtney.
Hi, everyone. Courtney Foley, Strategic Director, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Climate Action Campaign. We're a federal coalition that focuses on moving policy at the federal level on climate change. We have a dozen organizations that represent our coalition. Organizations like Sierra Club, Leader Conservation Voters, Environment America, National Wildlife Federation, and others. We also work with about 60 different nonprofits to move forward federal action on climate. You know, I'd say right now we're just coming off of our extreme weather tour that we did across the US and really saw a strong reaction to the press with over 180 clips generated from that tour and really seeing a lot of continued work that we want to do, including our extreme weather people's hearings that we've also been doing across the country. And I would say right now, a word that I would say we're experiencing is vulnerable. It seems like there's a lot of stress on our systems due to lack of preparation. We have so many different administrative standards like the endangerment finding, the carbon pollution standards, mercury toxic standards that are under attack. And the Trump administration is relentless. And seeing all these disasters having a higher impact and the surges we see from those storms, yeah, just continue to think that we're going to be vulnerable as we go into the next couple of years. Back to you.
Thanks. Do you also want to choose your one word? I would love to see all the words compiled together. But,
Oh, vulnerable.
yeah. Okay, thank you. And I'll pass it over to Hannah to go next.
Thanks, Nishant, and hi, everyone. Apologies in advance for my voice. I'm battling a bit of a cold, but excited to be here with you all. My name is Hannah Abdelati. I am the Assistant Director of Extreme Heat Initiatives at the Atlantic Council's Climate Resilience Center. Some of you might know us by our former name, which is the Archrock Resilience Center. I specifically work for the most part on our extreme heat portfolio. So excited to speak more about extreme heat as kind of still an underrepresented climate disaster and undercounted in the impact that it has on people. Extreme heat has kind of been found in research to be the deadliest climate hazard due to kind of how unique the impacts it has on people's health and livelihoods and how invisible those impacts are. And so excited to speak a little bit more about that. At the Climate Resilience Center, we work with communities, we work with local governments, we work with kind of a wide variety of stakeholders to basically kind of assess the common goal of making the most vulnerable communities more resilient to climate change and extreme heat. And so we've kind of launched different pilots on how communities can better build resilience towards climate and resilience towards heat in a variety of contexts, including in certain communities in India. We have also piloted work with our network of chief heat officers who we've helped get appointed in cities including Los Angeles, Miami-Dade County, Athens, Greece, Freetown, Sierra Leone, Melbourne, Australia, so really all around the world. And we're also currently providing some technical support to different local governments here in the US who are at various stages with their heat planning processes and kind of navigating uh, the loss of funding and resourcing that a lot of them are experiencing right now, and trying to give them some support to really do vulnerability assessments and launch planning proposals that help their most vulnerable communities with facing different extreme heat risks. So excited to hear from you all and to speak to you all. And I think that the word that I would choose for the current state of disaster preparedness is probably fragmented. It's currently being pursued by so many different agencies, whether in the local government context, federal, within the US, outside the US. And I think that there's kind of a lack of a harmonized and unified and centralized approach to how we can really create an effective and community-centered disaster preparedness framework. Yeah, thank you. Back to you, Nishant.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I'll pass it over to Karina to hear from you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Karina Newsom, the conservation scientist at National Wildlife Federation on our science team. I'm a wildlife biologist and ecologist, and my goal in all of my work, whether it's in official capacities through my job at National Wildlife Federation or simply in my capacity as a member of my community in Southwest Atlanta, is to advance environmental justice through wildlife and biodiversity conservation. And so a lot of that work for me has included the engagement of state wildlife agencies, which every state and territory has, which is not branded as a resource necessarily when it comes to disaster preparedness or environmental justice, but is a really important lever that more communities need to know about, that they can pull to increase the health of the ecosystems that they live in, so that when extreme flooding and extreme heat are hitting the places they live, there are ways that they can be prepared for that. And so the work that I do touches things, the intersections such as those. And I think the word that I would use to describe the state of disaster preparedness right now, I was actually going to use the word fragmented. The word I'm going to use, though, is collaborative, in that people have realized how fragmented it is, and we've really crowdsourced and worked together, despite the state of some of our elected bodies when it comes to providing us with the resources we need. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Karina. I'll pass it over to Omar.
Good evening. Omar Mohammed. I am the former executive director for the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities. And that organization is based in North Charleston, South Carolina. We do work around environmental justice, as well as resiliency planning, organizational development, leadership development, to help communities self-identify hazards and be able to address those hazards in articulable as well as actionable steps that comes from them. So the solutions are co-developed and developed from the ground up. And the word that I would use is resilient, because our communities have always been resilient. And I am encouraged by the conversations that I am having around the Southeast, around how communities are leading and also developing their own climate and disaster planning and action plans. So that's where I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Omar. And last but not least, I'll pass it over to Diane.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I'm Diane Pataki. I'm the Chief Scientist and Vice President for Science of the National Wildlife Federation. And I have the privilege of serving on the science team with Karina. We have an amazing science team, and our job is to ensure that everything that the National Wildlife Federation does is grounded in good science. And we think of science very broadly to mean what people conventionally think of as science, but very much respecting and valuing and elevating community science and indigenous knowledges as well. And we work in the areas of wildlife and habitat, climate solutions, and environmental justice. So on our team, we see many more opportunities to lift up the work of communities in bringing nature back to cities as a mechanism for resilience. And in my research area, I'm also a professor at Arizona State University. So I live in a very, very hot part of the country and up close and personal with heat risk. It's just such a serious problem in Arizona. And there are ways that nature can help us with resilience to, I think particularly, I would say, to heat and to flooding. There's just lots and lots of data showing how communities, if we can empower communities to be able to bring nature back to these spaces, that we can become far more resilient to climate change. A lot of my work has been in cities and looking at nature in cities, and everyone who works in urban ecosystems knows how inequitably distributed natural infrastructure and green space and natural amenities are. It is overwhelming when you start measuring any biological or ecological or environmental process in cities. It is inequitably distributed, and we need ways to use the data that we've collected and all the evidence that we've collected that these amenities and these mechanisms of dealing with threats from disasters, we need to use those data to bring more resources to these communities. So my word, in terms of a word to describe disaster preparedness right now, would be under-resourced. And that's true in many different aspects of disaster preparedness, but in terms of natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions, these are massively under-resourced. So how can we use all of this scientific data that demonstrates the inequities to get more resources to these communities?
Thanks, Diane, and thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciate you sharing your introductions, and I think we have such a good group of panelists. It's going to be a great conversation. Just to orient ourselves a little bit to the rest of the webinar, we're going to get into some questions about community stories and more of a community-focused perspective, and then kind of hop over to community science and the importance of that. And then we'll end it with just resources and tools that have been used to create power when it comes to disaster preparedness. And then for all the viewers, we're going to be opening up a Q&A at the end. Feel free to start asking questions now, but we'll jump into those then. And yeah, I just want to encourage all the panelists again that we want to kind of have more of a conversation rather than Alora and I just asking questions. So feel free to ask each other questions or just anything like that. But yeah, I really appreciate you being here again. And just to kind of kick off the community-focused conversation, I have a first question, which is, what factors contribute to climate disaster risk and who is most at risk? And then along with that, why do you think certain communities or populations face greater vulnerability? And this is open to anyone, so whoever wants to go at it.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. I mean, I can kick it off. That's fine. For the communities that I typically work in or historically work in, some of the factors that they face, not only hurricanes and floods, but also their preparedness, how they respond, and how they recover, add to their overall risk. In addition to that, they have cumulative impact in their communities when it comes to pollution burdens, when it comes to access to health, healthy foods. That leads to vulnerabilities when it comes to extreme weather events. It also, the housing stock that are in the communities that we work in, sometimes make our residents more vulnerable to climate extremes. So it's just not when people think about resilience or climate disaster, they think about hurricanes and wildfires and those type of things. But we also have to think about the quality of life aspects of a community that also contributes to communities being vulnerable to these extreme events. So chronic flooding, toxic release, housing vulnerability, access to healthcare, access to healthy foods, etc., can lead to vulnerabilities in communities and really some of the goal and roles that we play in helping communities kind of design their community-led disaster recovery plans is looking at all aspects of the community, their built environment, their family structures, who they can lean on. So a lot of times we are looking at not only vulnerabilities, but we also looking at the strengths that they bring to the table. So the existing resources that they have in their communities, those connections, those family ties, that they can then begin to look at how can we create a local community focused mutual aid network, and how that mutual aid network can then help communities strengthen themselves and be able to become more resilient over time.
Anyone else want to jump in with their thoughts? I know Omar can give us a whole, give us his professor moves and give us a whole PowerPoint, 2-3 chapters of a book, but definitely want to hear from everybody else.
I see Andrew's been raising his hand.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was I can't speak for any communities but the one I work in. And so talking about Philadelphia and in this area, the phrase historic disinvestment comes up a lot, and historic redlining and other urbanization initiatives that failed have put these communities in situations where, despite their best efforts, and they've tried, they haven't had the support necessary to deal with the environmental issues they're being presented with. And as the climate changes and things like heavier rain and downpour events happen, the urban infrastructure is not adequate enough to handle the changes in the environment. So you end up in situations where low-lying areas that were zoned the way they were, where folks have to live, they can't get out of. So you got to work with, what you got. But I think what contributes to the lack of climate resilience and the possibility of things like climate disasters really is a long time where people weren't working with communities that faced the toughest parts of living in an urban area. And now we're trying to address that.
I also just wanted to jump in and say, oh, sorry, you had your hand, Norma. I'll let you go.
No, I just kind of wanted to add on to that with what Omar was saying, but I think it's like a known with the social, economic, and social political factors that are very much an influence, and they definitely target vulnerable communities. And then just to touch on Andrew, I can only speak on my community, but there's always the voices that are not included, and those are usually the disadvantaged communities or the ones that don't have that seat at the table. And I think that contributes to a lot of the decision making. And just to give an example, I live in southern New Mexico, and currently there's a plan to build an AI facility called Project Jupiter, where for anyone that knows that lives down here, there's very little water. So to build a facility like that, it's just going to deplete the water. And it's only going to affect not only the community, but farmers and businesses around. So I think that the community should have been involved at the beginning and had those conversations before it led to where we're at right now.
I think Pooj, you want to jump in with your thoughts?
Yes,
And then
yeah.
Current.
Wanted to say, I think just 2 cents is around like access. I think the people who get left behind, like, whether or not I deal with a lot of folks who have language barriers, who don't have access to technology. So, we recently had some flooding events in Chicago. The city posted, the county posted, ways to fill out forms to be able to get help, even if you're a renter or a homeowner. And there were a lot of people who just didn't know about it because they're not on the listservs, or they can't read English, or they just don't have access to technology. So I think, and outreach, as a person who works in government, always tends to fall on the most like underfunded section of government. And so like if you don't have people going door to door like we used to before we had computers, the access part sort of limits the ability to get information, whether it's, you got to go to higher ground because there's something happening, or there's air quality is bad today in your area because of wildfire smoke. Yeah, so just wanted to note that.
And Karina, can you finish us off?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So in my community in West Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta, that kind of region of the city, we're the city in the forest, and we boast this a lot that like there's forest cover, the densest forest cover in a major urban area is in Atlanta, across thinking nationwide. But the management of the forest, the conservation of the ecosystems and of the wildlife and the plants is not equitably distributed. And so in Southwest Atlanta, we have huge invasive species problems when it comes to invasive plant species. And these invasive species are turning our trees, which are a natural amenity, which are part of our resilience to extreme heat and flooding, and turning them into a hazard. And so now when there are high winds, you have these trees that are choked out by English ivy and kudzu, and the city is not investing in the maintenance of our trees and our natural resources in the way that they are in the wealthier parts of the city and the wider parts of the city. And so the distribution of resources for wildlife and natural resources management creates risk landscapes that mean that our trees are now hazards because the care has not been there.
Thank you so much. And I think definitely Pooj and Andrew and Karina, you all touched on something that was really serious, really that stuck with me about non-investment. Pooj, you talk about, just the access, not making sure that people of different languages or different socioeconomic levels are able to get important information. Andrew, I had the opportunity to go to Philly earlier this year with the Overbrook Foundation, and they took us on a tour and showed us all this stuff, the great work they're doing, but we also saw like how the city's being gentrified and split up, and you see the areas where there's lack of care and there's starting to be more care to move new people in and stuff like that. And so one of the questions we've been getting in the chat is about, how is the current administration impacting everyone's work? Of course, as they work in communities and academia and other places, but also just in general, you're seeing. And I'd like to direct this question to, I don't want to say a couple folk, but I definitely want to hear perspectives from folk who are in different color states, if that makes sense. I know some people who are in red states are maybe somewhat used to the administration at a federal or a state level giving them the runaround. And some people like me, I'm in Maryland, I'm in a blue state. I've been fortunate enough to have a governor this term and the last one who has been a bit more proactive about environmental issues. Believe it or not, Governor Hogan was very proactive about a number of things, which surprised you because he's a Republican governor. But I definitely want to hear from folk from around the U.S. About, how the current administration's actions at the federal level, but also maybe some of your state level actions have been affecting your work of the communities that you work with. Norma, I see you. Go for it, girl.
Well, I mean, I can only kind of speak on the work that we're doing with the Community Navigator program, trying to engage with a lot of the community organizations and community leaders across the U.S. is that there is kind of there's big mistrust from the federal government, and we work mainly with providing grant assistance to federal grants, and I get straight up told like, nah, I'm not going to be doing that. One of the ways I think we've been kind of navigating that with the program is that our grant navigators have been very nimble to kind of keep up to date with what's going on with the new changes and kind of see how we can navigate that. So like really being smart about how can we now apply to these grants? How can we be very smart about it and very quick about how we're gonna handle the situation, and kind of putting the communities at ease. Like, there's still that money, there's still that federal money that is there for climate resilience. So yeah, at least in general, from what I've seen, there's a lot of mistrust. Put my hand down.
I'm happy to jump in. With our National Forest Safe Climate campaign, we found that knowing that there are agencies like FEMA and NOAA and the National Weather Service and EPA that, need to get the appropriations and the funding for their staff and their programs to make sure that we have the protections for all the extreme weather that's coming. And, with that campaign, we're really trying to make sure that members of Congress know that they have leverage. There's something they can be doing now. This is one of the few times we're going to have leverage in Congress for a while, and putting pressure on them and making sure they're hearing from constituents and knowing that, especially in places where we've experienced extreme weather, that they can make a big difference. We focus in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And, we found that with the work in those states, we're seeing the frontline senators, hesitant to really speak out on some of these extreme weather disasters. And we're trying to make sure that they hear from their constituents and feel that pressure, and want to make sure that they continue to have an impact.
Go for it, Jan.
Yeah, that's a great comment. To follow on, now is a good time to try and push back against the proposed federal cuts. So we have had to shift some of our work from focusing on science to focusing on protecting science and federal investments in the programs, especially in the space of climate. The federal government has not passed a budget yet for this year, this fiscal year. So we have to make sure that our representatives hear from as many voices and communities as possible and try and protect those resources. But we're not going to be able to protect all of them. And so there are lots of efforts to save, for example, the tools, the information, the resources that used to be located at the federal government, and offer them to communities in other ways. And it's challenging because now they're really distributed because different organizations are stepping up and they're housing different tools and different data sets in different places. But for example, the website climate.gov is now climate.us, which is now run by a nonprofit trying to reconstruct all of the resources that were on that website previously. So the resources will be out there, but they're going to be harder and harder to find. And so those are the two things. Right now is the time for communities to contact their members of Congress before the federal budget is passed. And actually, a lot of that effort has been yielding results. Some of the programs that were proposed to be completely gutted are funded in the proposed budget, but there's a lot more work to do on that front. And then the resources that we can't save at the federal level, there are a lot of organizations stepping up to try and continue to offer those. So hopefully organizations like ours and the others on this panel can help communities find those.
If I can add on to that as well, on your last point, Diane, I think that one reflection that I've had on these past several months has been the influx of collaboration among many different organizations, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's community organizations, even some private sector organizations. I've seen a lot of movement with different organizations approaching each other, being like, I have X gap, and right now we don't have the resources to fill it, and really just brainstorming in an extremely creative and innovative way on how we can continue to support the communities that we aim to serve, even with kind of a retreat of the federal government. So I guess one positive reflection has been that there has been really just an influx of a collaborative spirit among the climate space. And while, there's only kind of so many resources out there that can fill the gap that the federal government has left and will continue to leave behind. I think that spaces like these are important, as many of us are kind of doing similar types of work, yet because of kind of the situation that has been presented to the climate space, there has been so much more kind of dispersal and sharing of different resources that might complement one another in this space. So that has been one positive aspect that I've seen in the past couple of months.
Can we finish it off with you, Pooj?
Sure. I just wanted to like second that point that Hannah just mentioned. I think people will reach out to me and say, I work for the city, right? A unit of local government. People will reach out and say, hey, my funding got cut on a federal level. Can the city step in? And like my sad answer is like, no, we have a $1.5 billion budget hole ourselves. However, I put folks who reach out in touch with each other. And I think like my ask to them is to find the overlaps or find the ways that they can amplify each other's asks, and then sort of like come with a unified front as constituents to all of the elected representatives and say like, hey, y'all need to find new revenue resources. Y'all need to come up with new programs that have never been created or considered before. Like we have to be proactive rather than taking a defensive sort of like, oh, we can't really do anything kind of stance around it. And I think a lot of it is also just like pushing your constituents and electorate who typically aren't active around these issues, right? Politically active around these issues. How do you make it like an issue point for those folks to come out? Because like at the end of the day, elected representatives like care about getting reelected, right? Frankly, that's what the game is. So like, how can you win the culture war, for lack of a better word, on that front and really activate people to reach out and say like, hey, like we elected you, you represent us, like we need to see some cool, creative new ways to like fund these things. So I just wanted to add.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm really hearing from you about like how communities can have that strength and power to influence what's happening around them. And I kind of wanted to hear more about what are some more of those examples and ways that frontline and frontline communities have achieved progress to kind of combat climate change and disasters, especially like in terms of actually creating a preparedness plan, but also how these tools can be replicated and scaled in similar communities across the country. And I'll direct that question to Omar first, if that's all right, and then maybe Pooja and Hannah, if you want to speak more on that too, everyone, but yeah, I'll kick it off to Omar.
Yeah, thank you. So the community that we were working in, Rosemont, in Charleston, South Carolina, they were facing a tremendous, just a number of environmental challenges, not just with flooding, but they adjacent to the community was a industrial operation, a highway that split the community. There was a sound wall that was erected that also contributed to the flooding in the community. So the community had to tell a story because the local folks felt like, and when I say local folks, I'm talking about the local decision makers at the city level, the county level, although the community was vocalizing their concerns for the city to come in, the county to come in and address them, they could not get any traction. So the first thing we did was we helped the community in a photo voice project. So that was the very first project we did with the community. And photo voice is basically you just take, everyone has a cell phone, and you just take pictures of the concerns in your community. And we help them organize those pictures, tell a story around those pictures, and then we created a story map around the pictures. What resulted from this is that the city of Charleston came to the community and they asked them what did they need, and they basically told them they needed solutions for flooding. And out of that conversation resulted in the city contributing $100,000 to the community for a resilience action plan. Not only to develop a resilience action plan, but also the city was working on a citywide water plan, how the city was going to deal with water from an infrastructure perspective. And Rosemont was written into that water plan as a demonstration site. So some creative ideas that the consultants can come up with, and use Rosemont as a site to demonstrate those particular interventions to deal with water infrastructure needs. And after both of those kind of solutions came about, we also helped Rosemont successfully submit a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that allowed them to bring in their own consulting team, right? They're not relying on the city's consultants or any other consultants that come in, but they have their own consultants that have what they want to drive as community-based solutions. So now they're working through that process now with all different types of different stakeholders to the table to develop a full robust resiliency plan for Rosemont. So I can say that is one way that one community is addressing resiliency in their local areas.
I'm happy to go next. I think that one interesting initiative that comes to mind to me is the development of resilience hubs. Um, Particularly in California, the way that resilience hubs kind of came to be the way that they are is that um, many kind of local and even state governments, part of their disaster response and emergency management plan when any type of climate disaster hits, whether it's a heat wave, whether it's a storm, a big part of that plan is to essentially provide a community space that kind of provides shelter to communities who might not have in their home or in their workplace. And um, a big part of these kind of cooling centers, which is what they're typically called by government entities, is that in a lot of communities, many people don't really use them. Like oftentimes it's like situated inside a school gym with these like really uncomfortable chairs, and there's nothing in those spaces, and you just are expected to like sit in the AC and like stare into space. And quite frankly, a lot of people don't really want to do that. And what a lot of communities did in California is that they kind of came together and created a coalition um, with the intent of being like, we think that having a community space for shelter from climate disasters is a great idea, but the way that they're being executed is just not really feasible, and it's not supporting our needs. Um, and so a really comprehensive guide was created by the Asia Pacific Environment Network, which essentially provides guidelines for how different government entities can fund and support community-led resilience hub spaces. And so these spaces, for instance, would be situated in a kind of trusted community-owned facility. They would be funded to have access to some kind of community solar, for instance, or some type of energy source that is kind of owned by the community and is a reliable access when there's a threat to power outages. Um, these resilience hubs can provide access, for instance, to resources for the unhoused who might not be comfortable accessing those types of resources in government facilities. And so I would say that the creation of these resilience hub guidelines, which are now used across the country and even beyond the US, is a huge example of a community-led success of disaster preparedness and response, where people identified what they need, work together to kind of create actionable recommendations, and they're now used in a lot of government spaces. So I think that that's a really innovative and inspiring example.
I also want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to Hannah's Chief Heat Officer Network. So I've never met Hannah before today, but I just wanted to tell her that having a Chief Heat Officer has been a big game changer in Phoenix. They have an amazing Chief Heat Officer named David Hondula, and having somebody who is really responsible for making sure that there's a heat resilience plan, and of course that the city is actually allocating resources where it needs to go, that it's thinking about innovative solutions, and that it's listening to communities, especially vulnerable communities, is so important. So for folks that are in a city that's experiencing extreme heat, if the city hasn't tried that model of having a chief heat officer, there are these amazing examples of showing how that's making a difference in some of the hottest cities. So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you all so much for that. And one thing I want to pull out from what we talked about, a lot of you talked about community solutions and how people are finding solutions within themselves together. And we want to talk about, for this next question, as we get into community science and community data. Diane, you brought up earlier about how you all at one point, you're of course aiding with science and data, but now it's really protecting. As we see on the news every day, as we go through this vaccine debate, some folks think the data is fake, some people think it's real, and I'm sure there's more debates ongoing or oncoming about the environment, environmental science, and climate change. And so I wanted to direct this next question to a few folk here with us today. I'm going to kick it off with Andrew. Can you talk about the importance of how everyday community members are, of course, they're scientists, and how they have important things to share when it comes to community data that's important for everyone to live, and stress to everyone about how just important that community science piece from Ms. Johnson or Mr. Smith is, who lives in this community every day. And I'm going to kick it off with you, Andrew, and then I'm going to pass it to Karina, and then I'm going to pass it back to you, Diane. So we're going to do a little funny zigzag thing, but Andrew, go for it.
I'm going to tell you a story about actually Overbrook. You mentioned earlier, and something that happened to me there 2 years ago. We did focus groups of community members for a few months, and they gave us a list of the issues that they thought were the most important. And I put a really long PowerPoint together, and I was really excited to give this presentation. And I'm standing in the facility, and I opened this PowerPoint, and I lasted about a slide. And then the community started telling me what they wanted to talk about. And they wanted to talk about lead. And they really had a lot of questions, and they had stories. They talked about how their family members were affected by things, and they talked about people not listening to their problems. And so I turned my PowerPoint off, and I talked about lead, and we ended up doing a pretty in-depth study of how renovations of homes in West Philly aren't always some are grandfathered, some aren't, and who can be exposed to lead and who's not, and it helped the community understand how to limit routes of exposure. And we're working on implementing that now and sharing that out. So when a researcher like me from the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel University, I have all these wonderful ideas in my head from all the training I've had and all this. I don't have any lived experience. I didn't live in West Philly. I didn't live in South Philly. I didn't live in Germantown or the Route 9 corridor in Delaware where we work or in downtown Camden. But when we go and listen and actually hear what's going on and the observations, I mean, what is science if not the art of observation? So they are observers. They know what's happening. They're experiencing it. So you got to listen. That's local knowledge, and it's super important. And I think that input into the scientific process is clutch for making it so that studies don't sit on walls, and they actually change the communities that they're in, and they direct your research. I like to look at what I bring to the table as I'm an actual resource. Use me and use my team, and let's make a difference. And I think that, I don't mean that to sound too much like Mr. Rogers, although the world would be a much better place if everybody did. But I think that the best thing we can do is listen, learn from each other, and then make a difference together. And the only way you do that is if you get on the same level. And it's really important what I'm about to say. You got to build trust. A lot of these folks have had a lot of hard times with a lot of different people, and a lot of folks have come and told them they were going to, sell them a monorail or a pool, and they didn't get that. So you have to make sure that you really establish trust and really listen. And I think that one of the most important things is to develop a real relationship that lasts beyond one grant and is something that can be long term. And I think that the most important key to developing that is by listening.
Absolutely.
Andrew, I'm so excited to hear this. So I'm actually from Germantown in Philly, born and raised. My family now lives in South Philly, and these issues that you're even just the lead, like I'm getting, this is ongoing, and so I'm just grateful that there are people who are listening and working very diligently where my family is right now. So in the context of science, of data, and of participatory data, and by that I mean data collected by everyday people, community members, non-scientists in the academic sense. Um, there are predictable holes in data, both when it comes to environmental harms, so say air pollution, air quality issues, and when it comes to amenities, so to speak, so say biodiversity, where there are wildlife, plants distributed across the landscape. When it comes to harms, to Andrew's point about the importance of building trust and being rooted in the communities that you're doing the research in and engaging, I have learned so much from young Black academics about how to do this well. One in particular, Dr. Harold Rickenbacker. He just is leaving the EPA now, but when he did his PhD research on air quality, he was getting everybody on bikes. He had air monitors attached to bicycles, and they were riding through their neighborhoods where there were no EPA air monitors, but there was a lot of industrial pollution, right? But he didn't stop at collecting the data. Once he analyzed that data, he went back into the community. He even did testing in people's homes for this kind of air pollution, and he wrote out a plan of action for every person, every home that he had collected data from, everyone who wanted that information. He went back as a graduate student, he was doing this. So we have no excuse as professionals, right? When it comes to data like biodiversity data, another young Black early career, young PhD graduate, Dr. Deja Perkins, her entire research career has been about how data about wildlife falls predictably along lines of socioeconomic status and race, which means that we believe that wildlife are in whiter places and wealthier places, and that they're not in Black or immigrant neighborhoods or in lower income places. And data drives resources, whether again it's harm, threats, or amenities. And so what happens is this stitches up to national levels, and the federal government, when they create tools like blueprints that help to tell NGOs and nonprofits and other federal agencies where to invest their money and their staff based on what would be the highest impact effort, our communities are oftentimes left out because we're living in data holes. And so giving people the tools to collect data about where they live and making research relevant for what they're interested in is so important. And Deja, for example, has launched an organization called Naturally Wild. So if y'all want to look her up, Naturally Wild LLC, and she herself is going into Black and brown communities, training them on identifying plants and wildlife and how to use participatory science platforms to fill in the data gaps so that when resources are being distributed in their states or in their cities or through the federal government, they're not overlooked, and they can be elevated and visible to get the resources that they need.
Diane, go for it.
So I suspect that it is not a coincidence that at the very moment that sort of establishment science was opening up to become much more inclusive, it became under attack, right? Like the federal government started attacking science. And prior to January, there was this accelerating movement to elevate community science. And we saw it at all levels, even really established institutions. I was on an advisory committee for the National Science Foundation that was dissolved, but the committee released a report urging NSF to fund community science. The national academies were acknowledging that this is a critical source of information and thinking about best practices. The scientific societies, the Ecological Society of America, where I'm leading a task force on the future of actionable ecological research. And, you know, this whole area of community science has been recognized at all of these levels. And this is the moment in which science is being undermined. And I doubt that that's a coincidence. So, you know, we can't let these efforts to stop this movement block what we're trying to do. And we're just going to move ahead and keep urging institutions that are very well respected and that have big platforms to give those platforms to communities, and to give communities, again, the resources to collect these data and to contribute their deep knowledge, because a lot of the approaches to resilience that we're talking about are so contextual, like they're place-based. And what works in one spot is not going to work exactly in a different spot. You need a lot of local knowledge to be able to apply and to collect information. And scientists do recognize that now, even though maybe it doesn't seem like that all the time. They just are not going to have the resources necessarily to push this forward as fast, but it is moving.
Thank you so much. And I just want to do a quick plug in for those who may come in a little later. There is the resources icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and a lot of these wonderful gems that our panelists have talked about, they are in the resource section where you can click and learn more. I know we're speaking a lot, so writing might be a bit too much, and you can click on those later and really dive in them as you see fit. Just the FYI, I am looking down, I'm looking up. I'm an old school note taker. I take notes in black and white notebooks from the 8th grade in cursive because I had a bunch of nuns who taught me. So I'm looking around, I'm probably literally writing a bunch of notes to keep for later for myself, to use for something else for my own personal goods. But as we talk about data and how important it is, and each of you have dropped so much great information about listening to the communities. Karina, you really talked about, how data drives results, and that even though we have some of the best scientists doing the best work, there are still holes that communities can fill. I want to direct this next question to Omar and Hannah. One of the reasons I even know about community science, citizen science, is because in South Carolina, working with Reverend Leo Woodbury and Kingdom Living Temple and New Alpha Development, I got to meet Omar, and he and Reverend Woodbury were stressed about community science, citizen science, getting people involved. And so he's the one who really, I think I knew what it was, but he really drilled it in home for me about, like, I got to get the stuff from people I work with day to day to help influence what we're going to do next. And so I want to say, in your experience, as you created these emergency relief plans, do you have advice for communities that want to start collecting data to make their own plans going forward? And what resources are out there that can potentially help them get started?
Yeah, so for us, getting started, we collaborated a lot with academia. So having those relationships with academia, and also very early on in those conversations with academia, having conversations about who's going to own the data, how that data is going to be used and interpreted and distributed in the community. That has to be understood very on the very front end of the work. Also, how having I hate to say an MOU, but having some agreement in place about the role and responsibility of academia and community. That because you have a PhD does not mean that you run the show. That community is the one that is the driver of the work. And the conversation we have with academia is there to provide support, to provide resources to communities, to address these very critical issues and concerns that communities have. So I would say those relationships first with academia, and then having those necessary conversations about data ownership, the roles that academia is going to play. And also, this one is extremely important, the fair distribution of funding, right, to communities from academia. And that continues to be a struggle between community and academia. I'm going to leave it there and allow the other person to be able to contribute.
Goodness. Hannah, did you want to chime in?
I saw that Andrew wants to speak. To be honest, I don't have anything to add. I thought that was perfect. I mean, just totally spot on. And it's about partnership, but it's about collaboration and ensuring that um, that the work isn't extractive. And it takes a lot of effort to ensure that the work isn't extractive. It's not kind of something that is a given. And so I think it's just about creating those systems in place, as Omar mentioned, to ensure that There is kind of equality in the data access and how the data is used and how people are credited and how they're involved even after a specific initiative ends and continue to be involved in feedback loops. And so having those systems in place, I think, is one step forward to ensuring that research and projects in climate resilience aren't extractivist, but there's still a long way to go as well.
Thank you, Andrew. I know you're itching a little.
I just wanted to say what Omar and Hannes just said is so spot on. As academia guy, when I went out there, I didn't know up front that honestly I didn't that there was like a long history of really not great stuff, but the people I met did. And so like I walked in there like I'm gonna do good things for people, and they were like, mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, let's figure this out. And I learned over time that that MOU you talked about, Omar, is super important because if you I mentioned trust building in my comments earlier. If you lay that out in an MOU and understand upfront what you are, what you're going to do, and what you're going to provide, and like you live by that, that's a really great way to build that trust. And I wanted to make sure people understood that because, like, it's crucial to be honest and say what you mean, put it on paper, and then back it up.
Thank y'all so much. I love it. I love it. Omar really hit home with PhDs don't run shows because, as we know, I love my PhD folk, but sometimes the best intentions don't always turn out that way. So I thank you for your thoughts. Nishant, anything you want to add, or you want to kick us with the next question?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm loving everything I'm hearing. And to kind of continue this conversation about community science, I wanted to further go into like what are some ways that communities can detect and communicate these weather catastrophes before they happen, but don't necessarily have to rely on, conventional data or organizations. I know, Pooj, you and I work with the disaster planning group, and we've like found ways to do research about what the city of Chicago is up to. And then also with your pollinator garden work, you are bringing community members together to kind of tackle this from both like a local policy perspective, but then also the data. So yeah, I just kind of want to hear like from those of you who have worked with communities who are actually like actively making these plans.
I can go. I don't know if that was a prompt for me to go, but I'm happy to share. Yeah, I think what's kind of like important about the community engagement work is that like you're not just doing it cerebrally or academically, like you're doing it because there's like a need in the community. And I would say even like Chicago Asian Americans for Environmental Justice, we've had to, we have had to sort of like de-academicize ourselves and say like, okay, maybe we think these are important things that our community cares and thinks about, but we have to like ground truth them. So we actually like after having done a little bit of research, are now sort of taking it back to our Asian American communities in Chicago and making sure, via outreach and survey that they sort of like agree with us, trying to refine the exact like pain points that they're feeling. Like, do they know how to use the 311 system? Do they get responses from the 311 system that they can actually like understand? What other data would be helpful for them to have from the city? What sort of communication pathways would be helpful from the different jurisdictions of government? So I think it's just one of those things where you have to really be rooted in your folks to make sure that they like care about it too, because at the end of the day, like to make it, like I said earlier, to make it a groundswell, like your community has to join you in that and want that as well. And I think the other thing that I'm doing that's similarly related is we're trying to, there's a group of neighbors who are, after these flooding events, have sort of thought, hey, we've got this parkway adjacent to the sidewalk in front of homes that's kind of like a the city says that they own it, but they'll never maintain it. essentially. So it's a shared jurisdiction situation. Right now they use turf. So we're trying to figure out what would it look like for the city to use, bioswale, native pollinator seed mixes in order to act as, one of the lines of defense during large flood events in the city, right? Because when it happens in the city, our sewers are overwhelmed. We have intake valve restrictors that allow water to stay on the street some more, but that means that water could roll over the curb and get into people's basements. It's a massive problem. It's been a problem for so long. And so we're just trying to come together and try and have solutions, actionable solutions to propose to the city, but also have the buy-in of the community to say, hey, we actually want a Desi auntie to provide public comment during the subject matter hearing, right? It's not just one segment of the population, but we want everyone to sort of show up.
Thanks, Pooja. Norma, you want to go get into it?
Yeah, I think just one of the ways that communities can detect weather catastrophe, I think we undervalue traditional ecological knowledge, and I get into storytelling because I'm an anthropologist and a museum person, but I keep thinking about the floods that we had in New Mexico, and I recently found out through my historic preservation work that a lot of the older adobe homes would have two doors facing east and west, running from, when it would rain, it would flow into the Rio Grande. And that was just one way to prevent flooding, just like that traditional, like that cultural tradition. And I think maybe there needs to be more of looking into that and the way our elders have kind of worked through these climate disasters. And, just another story, even the other day, my mom was like, I know it's gonna snow this year. And I was like, how do you know it's gonna snow? And she said it's because it's been raining a lot and the soil has been holding a lot more of that moisture. And it's like, oh, like that makes sense. But I think there's a lot of value in traditional ecological knowledge.
Thanks, Norma. Alora, would you want to shift us into the last section on resources? I also wanted to, remind everyone that we have an active poll going on right now. So we're just getting some ideas on what the next CECC should be on. So if you have a second, feel free to fill that out. But yeah, Laura, if you want to take us into resources.
Sure. So I'm going to I'm going to direct this at Norma first, but I love for everyone to chime in. And since everyone just we have a group of folk who are just so vast in different things, I love for everyone to just not give super brief, but I want to hear from everyone on this question because I think it's important for people to know. And so give me your stuff, but give it to me in a way where I can get through everybody and we can keep going to the next questions. I don't want to say keep it sweet and short, but that's the long way of saying it. So, what resources or networks should people know about before our next disaster season hits? And I guess for some places, disaster is year-round, but what are some of those resources and networks people should know about to get informed of what's happening and how to get in front of it?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. Sorry. No, I mean, I think everyone should, go to their city or county first. But just to make it brief, with the Community Navigator program, we have tools that we can help people through if they're interested in applying to federal grants, but we also help out with non-federal grants if, because I know how it's been lately. We do have an interest form in the resource tab, I think at the bottom, that people can fill out. We also have a grant tracker for climate resiliency grants that are not federal, if people want to look at that. And then a community wildfire defense grant for those communities that are at risk of wildfires and they're interested in maybe applying as a community.
Anybody else? I don't know what my screen is probably different from y'all, so I'll just call them as I see them. Andrew.
In Philly, we're lucky. The city has a dedicated heat office that communicates in a lot of different ways with the communities across the city. So people are made aware of it. Cooling stations are opened, and that network is put out through community organizations. So there's really good word of mouth on the street. I would, prior to now, I would have said the National Weather Service is always reliable. Um, but these days, look to your municipal leaders if you can on how to do that. And there needs to be a lot of more mutual aid between organizations and word of mouth on the streets. And that's what a lot of the community organizations in Philly are working on. Again, I can't put that everywhere. You can't just drop what happens in one city and other places, but I think it's great to just be aware and listen. And if you have a cell phone, there are apps that can give you alerts on these things that are still really reliable.
Absolutely. Thank you. Omar?
Yeah, here in South Carolina, we have the EJ Strong, which is a planning tool. You can find that on the Department of Environmental Sciences website. I'll make sure, Laura, that I get that to you, that link to you, so you can share that out. That's a great resource of helping communities identify hazards as defined by the community, and then developing an action plan around those hazards. So there's some processes that they go through that is very helpful for communities. And the second resource I can say is A2 network, that is Anthropocene Alliance. It is a network of climate organizations throughout the country that get together. They have mutual aid networks. They have other resources that they share, and it's all around addressing climate and natural disasters. So if you're not a member of A2, look into becoming a member of A2. Really good organization. I serve on the board. We are a member of that organization. It's a really good network.
Hannah?
Sure. I also would have said the National Risk Index as well, which has traditionally been a good resource as well to be able to identify where risk is for, I think, 18 different climate hazards and different resilience solutions. I completely reiterate the points of what others said regarding staying tapped into your municipal government networks. Um, that's often kind of where information is also fed in from many community groups who are working directly on the ground. I think that one important element to keep in mind as well is familiarizing yourself with different local community level emergency response groups, whether it's uh, like a local Red Cross chapter, even Habitat for Humanity in some cities. I think that one of the latest hazards that has really demonstrated how useful that is has been the Los Angeles wildfires, where a huge amount of the kind of uh, short-term rapid response after the fires was really managed, led, and executed by different community groups working in the area to provide resources to affected communities. So familiarizing yourself with those kinds of groups is always valuable. And specifically related to heat as well, I think it's in the resources tab, but we created a platform called the Heat Action Platform, which basically has kind of a big amount of guidance on how to best prepare yourself from heat events, and as well as kind of testimonials from different experts working in the space.
Thank you. Thank you. Diane?
Yeah, so there's a question in the Q&A from Lauren about how to get scientists and engineers excited about working with communities and having communities be the starting point in the research instead of the data, like the scientists driving the research. And that is increasingly the best practice. And that doesn't mean that everybody in the sciences and engineering is using the best practice or respects the best practice, but increasingly there's a growing awareness that scientists and engineers, when they work with communities, and they should work with communities, that should be their obligation, if they work for a university or a college or a nonprofit, but that they need to listen first and that they need to build that trust that Andrew was talking about. So keep putting pressure on your local college and university because, they're at a precipice right now. Look what's happening to higher education. They're losing the public trust. They're being threatened by the government, and they're going to have to make a choice. Are we going to show that we serve the public good? And the pressure is on them to do that. So if you have trouble finding researchers who will do this kind of work and respect communities, there's places to reach out. You can reach out to us at the National Wildlife Federation. You can reach out to the society in the field that you're interested in. So if you're looking for an ecologist, the society is the Ecological Society of America, but there's other fields. There's engineering societies, and there's entomological societies, and there's wildlife societies. And those are the organizations that represent scientists, and they have codes of conduct and best practices, and they can help connect you to folks that would do this work. So keep putting pressure on us scientists to do good.
Great, Courtney.
I would just mention two quick resources. We have CAC's extreme weather map, which is on our website. And so it shows you weather disasters minimum that cost 1 million. It goes into the billions. And it has a lot of data from different databases that have been taken down from 2023 and 2024. And we'll keep updating that as there are more disasters. So you can kind of look at your area and see what's happened in the past. And then we also have our Trump administrative tracker. And so anytime there's an administrative rollback, endangerment finding, MATS, carbon and pollution standard, we've been tracking what the Trump administration has been doing and really trying to make sure that people see the impact that's happening. And then I also mentioned too, there's also the Extreme Weather Survivors Network, if you're trying to connect someone to a network if they've been through a terrible experience.
And Pooj, I think you're my last person. If not, the next person, let me know.
I will say we've been at the city level trying to, Hannah, I already emailed you connecting you to somebody with the Diffusing Disasters Extreme Weather Coalition here. So just letting you know to expect that email. But I've been working with the Extreme Weather Coalition, and they're trying to move away. They're trying to improve the city's Office of Emergency Management and Communication notification process to specifically, unhoused neighbors at this time, because it's really not been good. Illinois is really good about these things. There's like an Illinois insurance line. There's a Cook County disaster preparedness line you can call. The city also has something like that. But I do think it's those things that I think California has identified, like the cooling, heating centers being underutilized and a need for change for those things, expanded hours, transportation, maybe, in extreme weather events. So mutual aid, whoever said mutual aid before, like that's really critical to really be that immediate neighbor to neighbor assistance. So just like increasing the partnership between, those folks and the institutional city organizations.
Thank y'all so. Oh, Karina, I'm sorry. School child, I'm sorry. I
Don't
knew
apologize.
somebody in my head. I don't have all your faces at one time. I have a big person talking and the people at the top. So if I don't see everyone's face, I'm assuming. Okay, go for it.
Oh no, I know how this goes. No, so I referenced this briefly in my introduction, but as part of like a long range approach to community resilience and the healthy ecosystems that help communities survive through extreme weather, your state wildlife agency, which will have different names depending on the state that you're in, but if you Google your state's wildlife agency, the name will come up. It is your state government. They are responsible for serving you in your community, even if you've never heard from them before. The programs that they have and the resources that they have, whether it's granting opportunities or it's actually, programs, or there are resources that you can access through various veins. They may not be, as I mentioned, branded as being disaster preparedness or related to environmental justice or extreme weather, or sometimes not even related to climate, depending on the state you live in, like if they're not allowed to say climate change, right? but look through the resources that they have available as it relates to ecosystem restoration, habitat restoration even, and get those resources directed to where you live so that you can be as resilient as possible as you're facing extreme weather. And if you need any help whatsoever with figuring out who, if you can't reach people because state government can be slow moving in communication, National Wildlife Federation works closely with state wildlife agencies across the country and territories. And so we are happy to be of service to connect you with your state wildlife agency and find the resources or programs that make sense for your needs.
And Courtney, I see you put your hand back up again. Did you forget something?
Yeah, I forgot to mention the Environmental Protection Network. I saw in the chat someone was asking if you're like a laid off federal employee from the environmental space. They're a great place to go, and we work with them a lot to try to place op-eds and incorporate them into events, make sure their voices are heard. So yeah, just want to make sure to mention that network. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. And everyone who is listening along, a lot of our panelists have dropped some more links and they will be put into the resource. If you click on the resource icon, they're in there. So if we went a little too fast and you missed stuff, the things that they have shared with us beforehand and just now, because we have a background crew who's handling it behind the scenes, they are making sure those links are available to you all to click and look at your leisure. Nishant, you want to go forward?
Yeah, thanks everyone for talking about some of the resources. Going off of that, we're going to jump into the Q&A section. So for everyone viewing right now, feel free to ask more questions. I see some of you all have been asking them throughout this. And yeah, Courtney, you already kind of got into this question. I was actually going to direct it towards you, but just to read it off, somebody in the chat had asked, many scientists have been fired or laid off by this present administration. Are these scientists able to offer their expertise as consultants to nonprofits if they remain temporarily unemployed? I'm thinking particularly of NOAA and FEMA, so that progress on disaster management, resilience, and adaptability is not lost. Courtney, if you want to talk about it some more, and then if anyone else also wants to get into that question.
Absolutely. Yeah. So working through the Environmental Protection Network, we're often connected to a lot of those laid off workers, and they've been such a resource, like speaking at rallies, speaking at events, doing op-eds, and really lifting their voices. And I know a lot of them are finding employment, but unfortunately it's underemployment. And it's really disappointing to see such a large amount of federal workers laid off that provides such a great resource for the environmental community. So yeah, we've been trying to make sure that through our Forest Safe Climate campaign, we're protecting NOAA, FEMA, National Weather Service, EPA, their funding. And through that, hopefully we'll be able to protect future jobs being laid off and programs that are really important to the whole country. So there's a lot of ways you can tie into our Forest Safe Climate campaign. We have upcoming webinars and grass tops and grassroots letters that are linked in all the resources. So hope folks can check that out, because we definitely want to protect those workers and make sure they're helping to keep us safe as we go forward through all these disasters.
And
Yeah, there is a coalition of nonprofit organizations who are collectively looking for resources to hire the people who have been laid off or who were kind of forced to leave federal service. There's 300,000 people already, so we want to protect the remaining workforce, but there are all of these technical experts, and they are, you know, America's best experts in many, many of these fields. So we are very actively looking for resources to hire these scientists and experts and keep some of the momentum going in the science, because especially in climate science and environmental justice, you know, the federal government is going to disinvest in ways that we probably can't totally stop. So what's going to happen to our knowledge, you know, to all of the work, the resources, the research for the next 2 to 3 years? We need some ways to keep it going, even if it's not at the same magnitude as the federal government. So lots of organizations are really, really trying to find the resources to do that.
And I want to make sure that we shout out our DOE, FEMA, NOAA, EPA, DOJ, any of those folks, because a lot of them took the time to save data they knew would get lost in the nether regions, and they put it somewhere for us to keep for years to come, because unfortunately some folks don't think that should be available. And I also appreciate them too, because what I've learned from some former EPA folks and DOE folks and other folks is that they know the inner workings of the government, and so they know whose desks something should go on and how to get it to that desk, because they've been there for so long and can tell you, the names may change, but some of the things are still the same. And so having just that inside knowledge of, don't write it like this, write it like that, turn it into this person. If they didn't call you back, call them back and say this, because they just know the inner workings that some of us who aren't in those rooms and haven't been in part of it for so long, they can just off the top of their head and give us that knowledge, and then so appreciative of it. Do we have any things in the chat? Nisha, I'm looking, but my computer might not be rolling around with new stuff as quick as it should. I got one of those Wi-Fi notices about Wi-Fi being spotty.
Yeah, I got you. There's two more questions that I was thinking about getting into with everyone. I also wanted to encourage the panelists. I love that I'm hearing y'all are already emailing each other. I think that's also part of this webinar, is to have you all be connected too. So if you have questions for each other, also feel free to ask them right now. But I know someone kind of got into this earlier, but someone dropped in the chat, have you thought about creating a mutual aid pool? And maybe we can just talk about more about what mutual aid and communities you've been working with looks like.
Yeah, so I know that A2 Network has a really good system set up that is community directed around mutual aid disaster. And it provides not a lot of funding, but it provides some funding during those kind of challenging circumstances and events. So I would start there with reaching out to A2 and seeing how you can get involved with A2 Mutual Aid Network. Now, my second thought around that is that we also help the community develop their own community level mutual aid network. And what I mean by that is that they identify block captains in their neighborhoods. And each one of those block captains was assigned their block. And when there was an emergency or anything that needed to be addressed, it went through that block captain. And what that did was that helped resources to be able to get to where it needed to be directed very quickly. Without 300 people reaching out to you, you have 10 people that you're having communication with that you can direct resources to. So I would highly encourage, neighborhoods to develop their own mutual aid networks that is directed by the community and have a similar structure as a block captain. It could be a block captain. I have seen calling trees work. There's different things that work for different communities. Those are just some examples of how we have helped communities just establish a local mutual aid network.
Does anyone else want to share about mutual aid or any other questions for each other?
I do have another question. I think that, I guess this is mostly directed to Pooj, but I would love to hear anyone else's perspectives on this too. I think that a big focus in my work right now is looking more into how we can get more support between kind of collaboration and like more synergies between what the local government can provide and what communities need. And there are just so many local governments who I worked with, representatives who just really are extremely passionate about providing for their communities, but a challenge that remains, particularly with kind of disaster resilience, is just this disconnect. And so I'd be curious if, I guess through your work, if you have specific ideas or recommendations for how we can begin to bridge that gap between the support that communities need and what local governments can provide.
Funny, you should ask. The other big sector, like policy work that I work on is around the budget, like understanding the budget of the city. And I think, I don't know how it is in other cities, but like the budget, while you get some information about where money generally is being funneled to, like we have no, like city council has no look into programs under departments, how much money is going towards specific programmatic areas, what the metrics are, things like that. So I think like, although it seems divorced from like the issue at hand, like city council members really have to have good budget literacy. Um, and the executives really have to be, or the city council has to force the executives to give the budget information that they seek, because you can only reallocate what you know exists. And, you know, in a vacuum, you're not going to be able to say, oh, I just want $2 million for this effort, because they're going to be like, okay, well, we can't just generate $2 million. We have no new revenue that we can raise. Where do you want to reallocate it from, right? And so you have to understand, you know, based on your vote count, based on, you know, the political landscape, like building that power and consensus, like even like just internal power mapping of programs and services. We have like 36 departments. We have no clue like what the bulk of each function does, even though we can generally say like, oh, Department of Family and Supportive Services manages like cooling center and does this. Like we have no line item by line item thing. So that's another one that I'm personally working on, is sort of bringing budget literacy to the different organizers and coalitions to say, hey, you should be making these asks about budget transparency whenever you make your asks about your issue-based areas around, we want more funding for extreme weather planning. So I'm happy to follow up with y'all on the things that we've been doing, but I think that's critical.
Thank you. I saw Court. Oh yeah, go ahead, Korean.
Sorry, Nisha. Hannah, to your question, one of the things that I found as a resident in Atlanta, thinking specifically about like the natural resources management angle to environmental wellness and like safety and things like that, was that I assumed incorrectly that there was coordination between like our municipality, so like City of Atlanta, and like the State Natural Resource Agency. And I was absolutely shocked to find that they didn't even know each other. And I just, because of the work I happen to do at National Wildlife Federation, I happen to know this person here and this person here, I was like asking about this, like why is there no coordination or even like communication of any kind between these? And it was just like, oh, capacity, like there are more urgent things, there are, you know, it falls down the list of priority. But where everyday people, and again, because I happen to work at NWF, but other members of the community who are leading on environmental justice, for whom that's a priority, they found that when they can help stitch that together, which is not their jobs, but here we are, when they can help connect those dots, they're finding there are more resources available to address their needs than they realized, because this government entity and this one weren't communicating. And so if you find there are dots that can be connected between your municipality and your state level natural resources or other kinds of agencies, and you can make that connection for them, it's worth a try.
Thanks for sharing that, Karina. Just one more question from me to close out. Someone in the chat had sent a long message about staying hopeful, and which I'll drop in the chat, but the one sentence of times are tough, but the progress that has started will not be stopped is really resonating with me. And so I wanted to ask you all to share just one word about what's keeping you hopeful right now, what's keeping your communities hopeful. Yeah, and I'll pass it to Diane to kick that off.
Well, I'm always hopeful. I know that we're going to be able to surmount these challenges. It's just a question of when. So it's really just about like, how do we shorten the time? How can we make sure that the progress happens now and not 10 years from now? And that's just about the number of people that participate. And, you know, having all these folks on the panel, it goes a long way towards that. So thank you, Nishant, and the whole team for organizing this.
I'll go down the line. So Pooja's next on my screen.
I think my overused cliche word is organize. I think like if I'm able to channel my rage into getting more people involved and doing public comment or talking to their elder person or being part of mutual aid or finding an political home, that's giving me the only amount of hope that I have.
Andrew? kick it off to you.
I tell myself on a daily basis that I was doing this before him and I'm going to be doing it after. And the people that were living in these spaces were living there before him and they're going to be living there after him. And I remind myself every day that I gotta keep focused on what's coming. Like someone said, organize, vote, mutual aid, whatever we gotta do to get through this. I keep thinking about 2026 and 2028 and what people need to do on the streets. And you have to pay attention, but you also got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Because you can't help anybody else if you can't help yourself. So the thing I'll say, my one word is patience.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll pass it to you, Norma.
I agree with you, Andrew, so much. If if we can't take care of ourselves, we can't really help our communities. And I'm gonna be, typical as well and say organizing. I think when organizations and community leaders come together to become cohesive, there's a lot of knowledge that can be shared and resources, and I think that makes us stronger, just like today.
Thanks, Norma. I'll pass it to Karina.
What's giving me hope is young people. I'm talking like high schoolers, high school age, maybe even younger. Find ways to let them lead. The wisdom that I hear coming out of these young folks is so creative. It's so exciting and beautiful. And every opportunity we have to learn from them and let them guide our next steps, our future, we are going to be better off for it.
Thanks, Karina. I'll pass it to Hannah.
I would say this kind of builds on to Karina's point, but I think my word would probably be innovation. There's a lot of people in this space working on just really fascinating and inspiring projects, whether it's research, whether it's like creating new technology, whether it's finding different ways to keep people connected. When climate events happen, there's just a lot of really excellent work to be followed, and I think that it's always important to remember that that environmental justice didn't start with the government and it won't end with the government. And so it's just about kind of continuing to inspire innovation in these spaces and elevating it up.
Hannah, I think Courtney, did I leave
Sure.
anyone else?
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah.
I would say grassroots, just to give folks an example. So there's the endangerment finding. So you have Administrator Zeldin literally trying to rescind the scientific basis of greenhouse gases causing climate pollution. And if you look at the hearings we just had, we had 620 advocates come out and do testimony against the rollback of the endangerment finding, and they only had 20 people for. So just the grassroots, like they're going to take us there, and just really impressive seeing our community react in this moment.
Thanks, Courtney. Did I leave anyone out? Omar? Okay. Sorry, I lost track.
No, I just ditto everyone's comment.
We need Diane too, Nishan.
Okay. Thanks for having my back, Laura.
Oh, I already went, and then I was inspired by all the amazing responses. So I'm going to say that you all have given me even more hope. So thanks to the panel.
Thanks, Diane. And similarly, my one word is definitely you all. I appreciate all the wisdom and expertise. I'm feeling so inspired and activated from this conversation. And I really appreciate all the viewers and panelists for taking their Monday evening. Tuesday. It's getting late. And yeah, I feel like there was a lot of great takeaways, a lot of information. We're going to be compiling all of this into an email and be sending it out to all the viewers. And we also recorded the panel, so that'll be up on YouTube soon. And just another reminder, that poll is still active if you want to see another CECC on a specific topic. But yeah, I really appreciate you all so much. Thank you again for taking the time, for sharing all of your stories and important information. And that's the close of our roundtable for tonight. Yeah, we'll be reaching out soon and hope to see you all at our next CECC.
Thanks for having me, and it was very nice to meet everybody. Go Phillies.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I think we can go backstage, right?
Okay.